Welcome everyone to this go-to webinar on Management Reporter Questions and Answers, June 20th, 2019. My name is Noah Moseley and I am with the MSX Group. I've been working with financial reporting and budgeting solutions for over 20 years now, so I've been doing that for quite a while through my time with Microsoft. Before that, it was Great Plains, and now with the MSX Group. Glad to be with everyone. If you need me after today's webinar, my email is on the screen there, noah.moseley@msxgroup.com. It's the easiest way to get in touch with me. We've got a few slides that we'll go through before we get into Management Reporter. Just want to start off with the basics, some basic questions that people often ask, especially if they're brand new to the application. First off, I want to make sure that everybody understands that Management Reporter is a financial reporting and analysis solution for Dynamics. This has been out for many years now. It'll handle all of your financial statements, your income statements, balance sheet statements, cash flow statements, and any other kind of supporting schedule that you want to pull together from your general ledger data. All the report definitions that you create inside Management Reporter are stored in a SQL database. Everybody at your company will share, in most cases, that same SQL database, so everyone shares a set of reports. There are ways to divide those up between companies or different users, but typically everybody shares one database and all the reports are shared. Now, all of the data used for reports is usually stored in a separate SQL database called a data mart, and that is kind of a middle staging database between the GL database and the Management Reporter database. Every minute or so, Management Reporter goes out to the general ledger and checks for new entries or changes to any balances and copies those new transactions over to that data mart, organizes that data, and gets it ready for reporting. So if you post a new entry to your general ledger, you can't see it right away if you run a report. It'll be at least a minute before that new entry will show up in any reports that you run from Management Reporter. Building reports is pretty easy inside Management Reporter. Management Reporter uses building blocks for every report that we set up inside the application. These building blocks are row definitions, column definitions, and reporting tree definitions. So for every report we build inside Management Reporter, you'll have a row definition and a column definition for every report you build. The row definition will tell it what every row in the body of the report represents. The column definition will tell it what every column in the report represents. Some reports, you may be using reporting trees. Again, trees are not always required, but they do come in handy for summarizing any of your dimensions. You might say if you have a department dimension, you can use a reporting tree to summarize any of those departments for consolidated reports or to limit report data. And trees are required for some cases, like if you want to pull data from multiple Excel spreadsheets, or if you want to set security based on report entries, or if you want to consolidate balances from multiple companies into a single report. So reporting trees are not always required, but they are in a few situations. Now, when you install Management Reporter back at your office, there are several applications that really work together to make it all happen. Report Designer is the main one that you're going to be using to build and generate all of your reports. There's also a Report Viewer application, which is the application that comes with Management Reporter for viewing any report that you generate. There's also a configuration console. Not everybody uses that configuration console. That's going to be on your Management Reporter server. So the administrators would need that to make the connections to your data mart databases and import the companies into Management Reporter, and it really controls the back end of Report Designer. There's a report queue, just a process window that shows you the status of every report you ever generate from Report Designer. Just pops up, shows you the status, and it updates itself. So if you ever close the report queue window when a report is still running, don't worry, it doesn't delete that report from running. It just it still runs on the server in the background. There's also a FRX migration wizard. I want to mention that one because in the past, a lot of people used the predecessor to Management Reporter, which was FRX. FRX was the financial reporting solution before Management Reporter was released. And for a lot of those people, they would use that migration wizard to copy their reports from FRX over to Management Reporter, so they wouldn't have to start from scratch. That was a one-time deal, so if you I've already used that one, you can feel free to go ahead and delete that migration wizard there. You only need it at the very first when you first install Management Reporter. In the web viewer, that doesn't come with the install of Management Reporter per se. It's really just any browser that you use for web browsing. So Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome, you can use all those for viewing the reports that you generate from Report Designer. But every report that you generate, you can automatically view those reports in either the web viewer or the report viewer application. Let's talk a little bit about security for Management Reporter. It's a big part of the application, especially if you're going to open it up to a lot of other users to log in and view reports that you generate for them. Security inside Management Reporter is all based on Windows authentication. So every user that you're going to show or share a report with has got to be set up on your network as a valid Windows account and set up inside Report Designer as a valid MR user. Every user that you set up inside Management Reporter, there's 4 roles for those users. They're either going to be administrators, designers, generators, or viewers. So those are the 4 roles that come with Management Reporter. You can't add more to those. You can't change those. Those are the 4 that we have. And it really has suits typically any situation that you need for a report, administrators, designers, or viewers. Depending on what version of Management Reporter you have, adding users has changed over the years in those different versions. Some versions of Management Reporter you can add users yourself inside Report Designer. For some versions of Management Reporter, you can't add them directly in Report Designer. They have to be imported or copied automatically from your General Ledger system. So in those versions, you would have to set up different roles inside your General Ledger and assign those to the users in the General Ledger. And then Management Reporter would automatically copy those from the GL over to Management Reporter and assign them either administrator, designer, generator, or viewer roles. But with the latest version of MR, you can add as many users as you need to and pick the roles you want to assign them to. Now, once you get all your users into Management Reporter, you want to start assigning security to different parts, different reports, or different companies, or different parts of reporting trees. You can add those individual users to any of these different areas inside Management Reporter, but there's also an easier way to handle that security, especially with if you change somebody's responsibility within the company. You don't want to have to go back and change that person in 50 different reporting trees or 50 different folders in the report library. The easier way is to create groups inside Report Designer Security and then assign the users to those groups and then use the groups in reporting trees or library folders or other places inside Management Reporter. So groups come in really handy, and that way if you ever have somebody that changes positions in the company, maybe they're responsible for a different department in the company, you don't have to go to all the trees. You have one place to go and change that person's responsibility. You go back to security and look at the groups and move them between the groups, and that will take effect and control security for all the reports that you generate. Another great option for security inside Management Reporter are passwords for our building blocks. We're going to look at that in just a minute, but usually people have several people that are responsible for building reports. They'll be designers. And if you're a designer, you can see everybody else's reports as well in that building block group. To prevent somebody from changing your definitions, your rows or columns or trees or report definitions, you can password protect any of those building blocks. That way they can't change your copy. They can log in, see your copy, make a copy of it for themselves and use it in their reports, but they can't change your original copy. So password protecting your building blocks is a great security tip for any of your rows, columns, trees, or report definitions. And that last point on this screen here for security, building block definitions can be exported to a file for backup. So it's an easy process inside Report Designer. You can go there and tell it to export every report definition you got, every row definition, every column definition, every reporting tree definition, send that all out to an external file. And you can store that file anywhere on your network as a backup. And that way, if something does happen to your report definitions or any of your individual rows, columns, and trees, you can import from that external file whatever you need to pull back in. You don't have to import everything that you exported, and you don't have to export everything either. You can just pick and choose what you need to export, and you can pick and choose what you need to import. So it's an easy process. It's a great way of protecting your report definitions and all the different building blocks that you have set up out there. Let's talk a little bit about best practices for building reports. I've got this slide, and then we'll switch from here over to the application after this one. And if you have questions that you want to ask, type those into that question box in that GoTo webinar control panel or that chat box on the control panel, and I'll look at those as we go into the application. So if you are building reports, some best practices for that process is to start simple. Whatever your report you're going to build, income statements, balance sheet, cash flow, anything else you're going to build inside Management Reporter, start simple and build from there. So there's no preview options inside Management Reporter. You don't really know what you're going to get until you actually generate the report. So build as much as you can for the row, the column, the tree, and the report definition. Run it, see what you get, and then you always go back and make your changes to your different building blocks. But start simple, build from there. Typically, when you're building report definition, it doesn't usually matter if you're going to build the column first or the row first or the tree first. So you can build those in any order and then go to your report definition and use those in the report definition. There are some cases where you do need to build, say, the column first or the reporting tree first. Those are, say, if you want to build a column definition and you want to limit that column definition to certain parts of a reporting tree. So you'd have obviously build a reporting tree first and then build the column definition. Same thing for a row definition. Sometimes in a row definition, you might want to refer to part of a reporting tree. So you have to build that reporting tree first and then build the row definition. So it doesn't always matter which one you build first, but in some cases it does. When you're building reports, typically account numbers, the main number from your account mask, is referenced in the row definition. And you wouldn't have it in other places. So a good practice is, and this applies to not just account numbers, but also to any of your other dimensions as well, about not duplicating those IDs. So the account numbers or dimension IDs in the row and the column and the tree. So if you're going to refer to account numbers in the row, typically you would not have them also in the column or the tree. Sometimes you could build a report where you have departments or one of your other dimensions in the row definition or in the column. So in that case, you wouldn't want to have to also duplicate those in the reporting tree. So typically, when you're building reports, when you refer to any of your dimensions, it's either going to be in the row by itself or in the column or in the tree, but don't duplicate them between the three. How about the one up here about do not hide rows or columns while building reports? Hide them later. So some cases you'll want to build a report and you'll need to pull data into a column or pull data into a row that you know you do not want to show up. So something that you want to set as a non-printing row and use it in calculations, or a non-printing column and still use that in calculations, which is fine. But when you're going through the process of building the reports, typically I don't hide any rows or columns until I've got all my other columns pulling the right numbers that I want them to pull. So that way I can generate the report. I'll see the columns that are going to be eventually hidden. I can see what balances get pulled into those columns and rows that will be eventually non-printing, and make sure that those are correct. So that way you can see everything on the page, you know exactly what's pulling back into every row and every column, and check your calculations. And then, once you get all that hidden, then go back and hide your columns or hide the rows. For account and transaction level details, you can pull account and transaction level details into the reports that you're generating But when you add that level of detail, keep in mind that it does add a little extra processing time to the report, and it also adds more data to the database that's got to be stored inside Managed Reporter's SQL database. Now, if you know that you don't really care about transaction level details or account level details for these reports, don't include it. So that way the report will run a little bit faster and it'll save up, won't use up quite as much memory in the SQL database. And another great option for building reports is that bottom one here, using wildcards and ranges wherever possible. So your wildcards inside Managed Reporter are either going to be a question mark for every digit or an asterisk. Those are your two wildcards when you're referencing account numbers or any of your other dimension IDs inside the rows, the columns, and the trees. Ranges come in really handy as well. You can use ranges to reference any of your account numbers. You can use ranges to reference any of your other dimensions as well, and you can use ranges in the rows, columns, and trees. Whenever you're building these reports inside Managed Reporter, using those wildcards and using those ranges really helps to reduce maintenance going forward. So let's say you have a range of account numbers for your cash accounts on your balance sheet. And if you ever added a new cash account, that range should pick up that new account number if it's in the middle. And that way you don't have to go back to your row definition and add that new account to the row definition. So using ranges and wildcards anywhere you can inside Managed Reporter really helps reduce maintenance if you're adding new accounts a lot, if you're adding new departments or new cost centers or any other dimensions. Use them anywhere you can. So I am going to switch over to Managed Reporter. We're going to look at some of these things inside and more with us. Okay, I am looking at Managed Reporter's Report Designer application on my screen. We'll just start off simple. We'll talk about some navigation. We'll talk about the different applications as we go through the different pieces here. So Report Designer is the piece that you're going to use to build and generate all of your reports for this application, all your statements. Yes, easy navigation on the left-hand side here. I've got all of my report definitions listed. I have to scroll down a little bit for you to see the other buttons that are listed at the bottom here for us. Report definitions, row definitions, column definitions, reporting tree definitions. I've also got buttons for report groups, report schedules, and security. Whichever button you have selected, all the definitions will show at the top of the screen for us. Now, if you don't have all the buttons here, it might be that you are not the administrator for Report Designer, so you wouldn't be able to see security. But if you are the administrator and you don't see all these buttons here, there is a drop-down arrow at the very bottom left here, and that will let you either add or remove buttons to this list. Now, let's talk a little bit about security. Let's get that started for us for this discussion. If you are going to roll this out to a lot of different viewers at your company, you're going to want to set them up as users inside Managed Reporter. So they'll be listed here in Report Designer, the application, at the bottom left for security. I'll click that. That'll take us to the security section with all of our users. I've got everybody listed here. They're all network accounts on your domain. I've got Contoso / and the username for the network. Let me slide this over to the left a little bit so we can see everything on one screen. Okay, so for every user that comes into Management Reporter's application Report Designer here, they're all going to be assigned to one of the 4 roles here. That's on the right-hand column. I've got several administrators that can get to anything inside Management Reporter. I've got one designer here. Designer can do anything except the security settings for the users here. I've got generators. Generators cannot build reports. They can only open up a report that's already been created, a report definition. They can change the dates, maybe a few other settings, but they can't build new reports. So they can change the date and then generate that report. So generators cannot build. They can only generate reports that are already there waiting. And then the 4th option for effective roles would be viewers. And they would not even have access to Report Designer. They would have access to the Report Viewer application or look at reports in the web viewer. So 4 roles here controls their access rights inside the application. Now, once you have all of your users here listed, you could assign them to different areas inside the application, like reporting tree definitions or the folders in the report library. But before you start assigning individual people throughout the application, I would rather see them organized into groups. So on the left-hand side, I've got an option for groups. I've already got some set up here on the right. I'll look at the one for accounting and sales. So if I double-click sales, I'll see a list of anybody who is currently in that group. We got one person. You can add as many people to this group as you need to. If I look at accounting, I've got 3 people added to this group. And you can set up as many groups inside Report Designer as you need to. And then after you create these groups, then I would use the groups in the different areas inside Manage Reporter, like the reporting trees or the folders for the report viewer application. And I'll go to a tree for us, and let's look at that together. Let's look at a list of departments for us. All right, so I've got a list of departments in this window. All the details on the right-hand side on the spreadsheet. And if I scroll to the right, I've got column L, which is for unit security. I can set security for any part of this reporting tree, any row listed in this spreadsheet layout. I'm just going to hide a few columns here so I can get all this on one screen. So if you're going to start assigning security to any of your reporting tree definitions, this affects any user when you start assigning security to reporting trees. It also affects administrators. So even if you are an administrator, you need to be set up to every part of this tree in order to see anything in this tree at all. So the first thing I start off with if I'm setting up security for the reporting trees is I'll start on the top row in column L. I'll double click. I'll go to my button for users and groups, and let's pick the one for administrators. I'll add that to this very first row, and then I'm just going to copy it and paste it to every row in this tree so that my administrators have access to everything in the tree. And once I have that, then I'll go back to my different departments and assign their roles. So for my sales department, row 2, I'll double click in column L. I've already got administrators added, but I'll go to the button for users and groups, and I'll add my sales group. And one for accounting as well. And you would typically set up groups for any other parts of the tree that you need to set up security for. And then add those in column L to that part of the tree. Now, if any of your individual users change responsibility, so if I have someone who I need to move from accounting to sales, I don't have to come back to the reporting tree to make any changes here. This is fine just the way it is. I would go back to security in my list of groups. Scroll back over to that for us. And let's say they're going to move from, say, from accounting to sales. I'll double click the group for accounting. I'll take that person, I'll take Charlie out of here. And I'll go to sales, I'll double click, and I'll add Charlie to this group. And that way the groups are updated by individual users, and then any reporting tree that uses those groups is updated automatically. So I don't have to go to the individual trees and make any changes. It's all right here in the group window in the Report Designer application. Easy way to manage that. Let me go back to that reporting tree with you. And I want to mention another option for protecting your building block definitions, like this reporting tree, so that other people can't change your tree. They could open it up and make copies of it and use their copy, but not yours. You can password protect any of your building block definitions. So anything you've got open, you've got an icon right here at the top that says protect/unprotect. Click that one time, it'll ask you for a password and then to confirm the password. And then anybody who wants to make changes to it will have to type in that password to make changes. So it's a great, easy way to protect your definitions so that other people can't change them. Now, other administrators can override that, but designers can't. So designers would have to make a copy of yours and then make their changes to their copy. Now, I did that password protecting for the reporting tree definition I've got open here. That same icon for password protecting is available for any row definitions, any column definitions, or reporting tree definitions. And if you password protect a reporting or report definition itself, keep in mind that does not automatically password protect the row, the column, and the tree. You'd have to go to each one separately and type in the password for each one. Okay, so that'd be 4 passwords you've got to type in for those 4 different pieces. Now, I mentioned earlier that typically back at your office, everybody will be sharing one Management Reporter SQL database. So that typically they would have access to all the reports in those companies that everybody shares. You can set up security where they do not have all access to all reports. If you go to Company up top, you've got Companies and you've got Building Block Groups. Building Block Groups, if I click that, opens up that list of Building Block Groups. Will show you a list of every set of reports we've got out here. I've got 3 listed here, the default building block group, one for Fabricam, and another one here for testing. So each one of these has a separate list of report definitions. You could have a separate set of reports for every company you've got. So if I close this window and go to Company and Companies, for every company here, go to Modify, I could change the building block group that it uses. All right, so every company could have a different set of reports. And that's not very common that you would have that situation. Typically, every company in here would use the same building block group, which means they would all share the same set of report definitions. But just want to point out that it is possible to separate it if you wanted to by company. Let me take us back to the building block group list, which was under Company and Building Block Groups. And we'll talk about this window here a little bit. Now, I mentioned on the PowerPoint slides that there is a way to make a backup of every report definition, every row, column, and tree that you've got out there to an external file. So whichever one you have highlighted, there's an export button on the right-hand side. And this export button will show you a list of every report definition you've got inside Management Reporter, as well as every row definition you've got, every column definition you've got, reporting tree definitions, and even dimension value sets. And you can highlight individual ones, or you can select all of them. And then whatever you have selected, you can export to an external file. So it's a quick way to make a backup copy of every report definition you've got. It sends it out to a file. I'm going to show you lets you pick anywhere on your network, any folder like your desktop or anywhere else on the network to send it to. It's a .tdbx file type. That's the file that is only readable by Management Reporter. You'll send that out to that external location. If you ever need to pull back in any of those definitions, like if something gets lost or messed up so bad that you need a backup copy, you can go right back to Company and Building Block Groups, use the Import button, and import from that external file. And when you import or export, you don't have to export or import everything. You can pick and choose what you want to export or import. So it's an easy process, great way to keep a copy in case something goes wrong and you lose certain things here. I want to mention the other 2 applications for viewing reports for you. So you've got 2 ways automatically of viewing every report that's ever generated from Management Reporter. Now, when you generate a report, the report processes and it opens up automatically in whatever viewer you have set as the default viewer. That setting is located under Tools and Options. And in this window, the third checkbox down says Use Management Reporter Report Viewer as a default viewer. If you have that checked, any report you generate opens up in the Report Viewer application. If you have this unchecked, the report opens up in the Web Viewer. So you can change that anytime here. This is a per person setting on this machine, so it doesn't affect anybody else. It's just this user setting. So if I open up this report, I have the Web Viewer set as my default viewer. So that report runs and it opens up in, I'm using Internet Explorer for my reports here. So every report you build, look at it in two ways, Report Viewer or the Web Viewer. It is still one report. So this report is stored in the Management Reporter SQL database. So when you open this report, you're just looking at that report from SQL. It doesn't matter if you're looking at it in the Web Viewer or the Report Viewer application. It's still the same report, you're looking at it. Different ways of navigating it, different functionality between the Web Viewer or the Report Viewer application, but it's the same report you're looking at. So this report I'm looking at here, if I wanted to look at it in other applications, I can. You've got at the bottom left here different buttons for download. I can send this report out to XPS Viewer, I can send it out to Excel, I can send it over to the Report Viewer application. Your options for sending these reports out to XPS or Excel or to the printer even, or to PDF, are usually better inside the Report Viewer application. So if you're going to be someone who's exporting reports out to Excel or printing these reports, I typically would not do that from the Web Viewer. I would do it from the Report Viewer application. The options are better, the formatting is better, especially if you're printing. So let's go over to Report Viewer, the application for this report. All right, so same report, I'm just looking at it in the Report Viewer application, which is also where the report library is located. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But the options for exporting and printing are located at the very top of this window here on the right. Send this out to Excel, XPS, send it to the printer. Usually people who send the reports to printer also have a PDF driver for printers, so you can send it out to PDF files there. There's an email option as well, but let me mention that if you send this report out in an email, it doesn't send the report out as an attachment in that email. It sends a link in that email back to the report. And whoever you send that email to, they click the link to look at the report. It opens up that report in the report, the Web Viewer. So keep in mind that's tied to security. Whoever you send the email to, they've got to be on the network and they've got to be set up as valid MR users in order to open up that report. So it does not send that report out as an attachment. It's just a link that will open up in the Web Viewer for us. Let's look at the bottom left here. So I've got this report open. I'm looking at this as a report data part of this application. There's also a button for the report library. So let's look at that for a minute. Now the report library on the top left, you've got the top level. I can click the plus button to expand that and see all the different folders we've got set up here. You can set up as many folders in this library as you need to organize any of the reports that you generate. These folders look like the folders you see in Windows Explorer, but keep in mind they're not. They are just folders in SQL organizing the reports in SQL. So they're not on the network, they're just organizing the reports in the SQL database. You can set permissions for any of these. If you set up permissions or security in the reporting tree definitions, any security you set up in the reporting tree gets copied into the permissions for the library folders. So if you set up a income statement with a reporting tree and you've got groups assigned in that reporting tree, when you generate the report, it doesn't matter where it goes here in any of these folders, any security set by the reporting tree for that report goes into these folders. All right, so that keep that in mind. Now, if you do not set up security in the reporting trees, you can come here to the library and set up permissions for any of these folders. There's a permission button in the top here. I'll click that, and that will open up the permission window for the library. And then I can set up security for any of my different folders here. I can add any of my individual users. I can add any of my individual groups here. Typically, I'd go with groups. I would not add individual users to these folders. I would do it by groups. And then what access they should have to the reports in this folder. Should they just be able to view it? Can they make changes? Can they create new ones? Can they delete anything? And usually, once you set it to a top level folder, it will roll down the rights to any folders underneath this folder. So that way, if I look at 2013's folder and expand that, I can see any security here would also roll down to my individual months. So security here inside the library. If you're going to set up by the folders here, set up the folders first, and then go to permissions to add the groups to your different folders that you set up. Another thing to catch here while we're looking at the library here and the list of all the folders, anytime you run a report from Report Designer, Management Reporter will store that copy of that report in the SQL database. And if you run an income statement 10 times a month, it's going to store all 10 copies of that income statement, even if the first 9 had errors on it or it wasn't finished yet. You ran it to see how far along the income statement was and what you needed to catch or fix. So if you look at any of these reports here, if I double click any of these, it will open up the last copy I ran. But if you right click on any of these, there's an option for show versions. Now let me look at one that's got some older copies. So this will show you anytime I've ever run this report in the past, the date and the timestamps. All those will be listed. It may be that I don't care about any of these reports except for that last one. So I could easily just highlight those and delete those from the Management Reporter SQL database. So keep in mind, every time you run a report, that copy is stored in SQL. And you could come here and clean out the old copies if you wanted to. Some people do not archive reports, so they don't care about organizing reports into different folders. If they needed last year's income statement, they'll just go back to Report Designer, open up the income statement definition, change the date to last year, and regenerate that report. Some people do like to keep a static copy of what reports they handed out last year, so they'll always have that copy. So it just depends on your company and whether or not you want to keep the static copy of what you handed out last year. If you do, you can organize those here in the library. A quick note about that. If you are going to be somebody who archives your reports here, typically what I would do is generate your report, like your income statement, have it go out to the top library level folder. That way you can run it, proof the numbers, make sure everything's correct, and when you're finished with the income statement for the month and you're ready to hand it out to people, you know that that last copy is the one that you want to archive. So in that case, I would go down here, I'd find that income statement, and I would, if I ran it for 2013 January, let me go back, sorry. I will click and hold that report that I want to archive and drag it to the month I ran it for. So if I ran it for January 2013, I'd drop it here. Management Report will ask me if I want to move all copies or just the most recent one, and it's the most recent one that I want to archive. So I move my most recent copy only. That moves that one right here. If I go back to the library folder, that lets me know that these reports, I just moved the most recent one. Anything left here, I do not want to keep. I can just delete that set of reports so I don't clutter up the SQL database. So it's an easy process. Run the reports as many times as you want to. click and drag that most recent copy to the monthly folder it was run for, and then delete all these old copies under the library folder. So a little bit about housekeeping for the library of reports here. All right, so we have these webinars for you, but if you need help with your local installation of Managed Reporter or these other applications that we handle, Prospero, Forecaster, or even FRX still, email me. We'll be glad to help you with your local installation with software upgrades, building reports, budget setup, budget administration, and a lot of other things that you just don't have time to do yourself, or if you feel like you just don't have the expertise to build these things, just let us know. We do this kind of stuff every day. Email me at noah.moseley@msxgroup.com. It's the easiest way to get in touch with me. These 1-hour webinars are great, but sometimes you might prefer some training for these products. So if you're looking for more in-depth and hands-on training for Managed Reporter, Forecaster, or FRX or Prospero, email our training alias at training@msxgroup.com. We offer online classes every month. We also offer some classroom trainings or custom training where you can even do it just for your company with using your company data. I'll be glad to set that up for you. Just email us at training@msxgroup.com. And a little bit about a replacement option. If you are in a situation where you are looking for a replacement for Management Reporter, Forecaster, or FRX, we have Prospero. It's an application that we built specifically to replace these products. It's a single application that handles financial reporting as well as budgeting and analysis. So like all these other products, Managed Reporter, Forecaster, FRX, some of those handled financial reporting, Forecaster handled budgeting, but they were all separate applications. We took what we thought were the best points from these products and put it into a single application, named it Prospero. We've had that on the market for several years now. And Managed Reporter, Forecaster, and FRX, Microsoft has already discontinued development for these products. So everyone will eventually have to come up with a replacement. So if you're interested in seeing a demo of Prospero, email me. I'll be glad to show you the financial reporting, the budgeting, and the analysis that we built into Prospero. All right, don't see any other questions that have come in the chat box or the question box. I'm glad that everybody was able to join us today. I'll have this webinar up on YouTube and a website as well. So if you need us after today, email me, noah.moseley@msxgroup.com. Glad to have you here with us. And remember us, please, as your expert resources for financial reporting and budgeting. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.